This presentation, titled ISO 45001 and Mental Health, yes, it's in the standard, comes to us from Rick Gehrke. Rick has 25 years of experience in environmental health and safety with work in diverse industries, including food production, automotive and aerospace manufacturing, government and defense, electric power generation, chemicals, and more. He's a veteran EHS consultant, auditor, and trainer. Prior to his current career with Intertech Alchemy, he worked for Intertech as a Green Services Associate Program Manager. Rick is an exemplar Global Certified Management Systems Lead Auditor with experience in ISO 14001, OSIS 18001, ISO 45001, ISO 50001, Lead Green Building Certification, Business Development, and Certification Program Management. He's also a U.S. Air Force Airborne Operations veteran. And with that, take it away, Rick.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, everybody. Today, I want to talk with you about ISO 45001 and mental health. So some of the things that we're going to go over today is first, we'll talk about what makes mental health part of the ISO 45001 standard, and we'll look a little bit about the history that led up to it. Talk about some relevant definitions and how they affect the requirements. We'll talk about some specifics of the requirements, so we'll go through the standard and look at how we can incorporate mental health into our systems through these requirements, and give an example of how an auditor might write a finding and how an organization might write a corrective action plan relative to mental health. So first, let's talk about what makes mental health part of the standard. All right, a little bit of history here. First, let's look at OSAS 18001, 1999. This is when we all started getting into formal health and safety management systems. The 1999 version didn't say much about it. It said that the health and safety conditions and factors that affect the well-being of personnel, that's kind of vague. It doesn't really give us much to go on. And at the time, that version of the standard didn't have a definition for ill health. Once we went to OSAS 18001, 2007, it started getting more specific. For example, there was a greater emphasis on health, and it also brought some definitions in that made mental health a part of the scope of an OH&S management system. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the definitions from OSAS 18001, 2007. This is important, and I would urge everybody, whether you're a system implementer or an internal auditor or a third-party certification auditor, whatever you're doing, that you make sure to become very familiar with the definitions in the standards that you're working with, because they do have an impact on the meaning of the requirements. So in OSAS 18001, 2007, the standard defined a hazard as a source, situation, or act with the potential for harm in terms of human injury or ill health. Ill health is defined as an identifiable adverse mental or physical or mental condition arising from or made worse by a work activity. This also has a bearing on the meaning of the word incident, which is a work-related event in which an injury or ill health, regardless of severity or fatality, occurred or could have occurred. So it's important to keep these in mind. All right, so let's take a look at the scope now. This is still going back to OSAS 18001, 2007. All the requirements in the standard are intended to be incorporated into any OH&S management system. So a couple of points I'm trying to make is, one here is that this requirement to incorporate mental health into the system isn't new with ISO 45001. Also, that we can't scope it out if we want to be able to claim conformance to a given standard. All right, so jumping ahead to ISO 45001 now, the introduction states that as an organization, we're responsible for occupational health and safety of workers and others who can be affected by our activities. That includes promoting and protecting their physical and mental health. So right there from the introduction, it's in there in black and white, so don't let anyone tell you it's not part of the standard. All right, also from the scope, again, this is kind of a repeat of what I said about OSAS 18001. We can use part of it or all of it to systematically improve our OH&S management systems. However, if we're going to claim conformity, either through, for example, self-certification or for us, those of us that are third-party certification auditors, every one of these requirements has to be fulfilled without exclusion before conformance to the standard can be claimed. Here's just an observation that I've seen after having done a pretty good number of OSAS 18001 and then ISO 45001 audits. When we get into starting to ask questions about psychosocial health, and I'm going to use psychosocial interchangeably with mental health here, that kind of mean basically the same thing, so I may switch back and forth, but when I say psychosocial health means the same, or mental health means the same thing. So most organizations, depending on where they are, they have some kind of processes. A lot of them are managed by human resources or something like that talk about psychosocial hazards, for example, things that fall under Department of Labor laws. But what I've seen more often than not is they're not actually integrated into the management system, and they don't satisfy all the requirements of ISO 45001. Okay, so more definitions, and these are from the ISO 45001 standard now. They're somewhat a little reworded or a little rearranged, but let's take a look at them. So the management system is the system used to achieve OH&S policy. One of the intended outcomes of the standard is to prevent injury and ill health, and as we'll see, ill health has a definition here which incorporates mental health. And the policy, OH&S policy, is the policy to prevent work-related injury and ill health. And again, I'm going to keep coming back to that ill health definition because it runs throughout the standard, and it's very important to keep that in mind, whether we're implementing a system or auditing one. Okay, a hazard is a source with potential to cause injury and ill health. And we want to keep this in mind because, as you know, the word hazard appears all over in the standard. So whenever we're looking at that as an auditor or an implementer, we need to keep this definition in mind. Injury and ill health is adverse effect on the physical, mental, or cognitive condition of a person. So we can see that this incorporation of mental or psychosocial health has become stronger as we've gone along in years between OSAS 18001 to ISO 45001. We also have seen with ISO 45001 as the new 14001 and 9001 standards is there's a big focus on a risk-based approach. So when we look at the definition of risk, it's a combination of likelihood of occurrence, exposure, severity of injury, and ill health that can be caused by the events or exposure. So again, ill health comes in everywhere in the standard where the word risk comes up. So we have to consider and manage potential adverse effects on the mental or cognitive condition of people as part of meeting the requirements in the standard. All right, so next thing I want to do is start looking at the actual requirements. We're not going to go through every single subclause or everything in the standard, but I want to go through some of the requirements and just give you some ideas as a consultant, a trainer, a system implementer, or an internal or external auditor on some things to think about when you're developing your audit trails and evaluating objective evidence, doing interviews, and so on. So first, let's take a look at some examples. We think about bullying, sexual harassment, racism, sexism, favoritism, nepotism, all these typical isms that are unfortunately a part of human nature, and they cause problems. So some of the risks, people are scared, they don't perform as well as they could. It can actually turn into violence, including violence against ourselves, and obviously turnover, and we're going to lose talent. Our training's going to walk out the door. Another one is long working hours. The standard somewhat addresses this under operational control, working shifts, especially if you're on rotating shifts, changes in the workplace, which can stress people out and cause mistakes. And a third category that I'm going to go into in a little bit more detail here in a second is poor leadership. Leadership is not the same thing as management, and sometimes we focus too much on management, supervision, and bossing, and not enough on leadership with some very negative consequences. For example, disorder in the workplace, resentment between employees, people being depressed, turnover, people quitting. People typically, they don't quit their job, they quit their boss. Their performance can be degraded, and we're going to lose money. So In this presentation, I'm going to give you a couple of case studies from my own work history. I'm kind of telling on myself a little bit here, but that's okay. I'm allowed to do that. Here's a situation where poor leadership caused some problems in the workplace. At one point in my career, I was a assistant program manager, had a lot of full-time and contract reports, pretty high-pressure job, a lot of travel and everything like that. And I started getting complaints from some of the coworkers, for example, abrasiveness, being kind of intimidating. It's just kind of in my nature, and I'm a big guy and kind of look scary and sound scary. My annual reviews had instructions on being more diplomatic, improve communication skills. Nothing really specific, though. And I took the company's online supervisory courses, which focused on supervision and management, but not leadership. The complaints kept on. The annual reviews continued to direct improvement and diplomacy, again, without a lot of real specific direction. So at one point, I ran a Survey Monkey survey, sent it out to about 30 people, just asking a bunch of questions about what the leadership needs were, what the behavior style was. You know, do you trust this guy? Is he approachable? Does he take criticism? On and on and on. And out of those maybe 30 some surveys I sent out, I got 17 responses. And the some of the comments that came back were, to put it mildly, very blunt. And, people were being very straight up about what some of the problems are. And it stung reading those things, but it's really what I needed to hear. So I started trying to figure out what I could do to improve my leadership skills, did some research, and I found a couple of really important topics to study. The first one was servant leadership, and the second one was emotional intelligence. So went through all those and started getting feedback within just a matter of a few months about the improvement. So it definitely generated some results. So hopefully you're going to get a copy of this presentation. And I've just put some pictures here up of the resources that I found. The first one is called The World's Most Powerful Leadership Principle. It's a really good book, fairly easy read, but it's basically, not thinking of yourself as being in charge of directing everybody, but being in charge of supporting them through your own actions. The other important one is emotional intelligence. It doesn't matter how smart you are or how smart you think you are. If you don't have the emotional intelligence to be able to apply that knowledge in a way that helps other people, it's going to be mostly useless unless you're working alone all the time, which is not the case for most people. And then the servant leadership training course and audio version is something you might want to get. Let's say you travel a lot, you're on the road, and you've got some road time or airplane time and time to listen. You might get some use out of this. Okay, we'll come back to that in just a little bit when I give you an example, finding a corrective action. So now let's start looking at the relationship between mental health and the requirements section in ISO 45001. And one of the things that I've had brought up to me in a few times is that, well, hey, the definitions aren't auditable. Well, that's true because the definitions don't have any requirements in them. There aren't any shalls, but the requirements are auditable. And the definitions have a direct impact on the meaning of all those shalls in the requirements section. Where the standard defines a word, that's the definition that holds when we interpret the requirements. Okay, so context. Most of these things you're going to see if you haven't thought of it already. If we just keep those definitions of things like what's ill health, what's a risk, what's an opportunity, what's a hazard, and just keep those in mind and keep the mental health aspect, it's going to become clear in all these requirements sections what we need to do. So internal and external issues, are they related to mental health? People, where we are, how old we are, our diversity mix, all these kinds of things. Needs and expectations. What needs and expectations do interested parties have related to mental health? Obviously, our employers or our employees might be our leadership, could be the union, whoever it is, and which of these could be legal or other requirements. And we'll go into that more when we get to legal and other requirements. So some examples here, for example, under Department of Labor, we've got a whole bunch of laws on that. However, if we forget to include those in our consideration, then our list of interested parties and their needs and expectations are incomplete. Another example would be, for example, if your organization is based in Mexico, there's a relatively new official Mexican standard 035 that focuses on psychosocial hazards and controls and so on. Okay, scope. Scope is more complicated in the new version of the standard. It used to be you basically put down a copy of the same scope that you would put on your certificate, and that was okay. But now we need to go into a lot more detail on our scope for both ISO 45001 and ISO 14001. So now, what aspects of our system are going to address our responsibility to promote and protect people's mental health? Did we think about these things, and is it evident in the scope documentation? For example, internal and external issues that are involved, interested party requirements and expectations relative to mental health, and either planned or performed current work activities. So one of the things you'll find from what I've seen is at this point, the audit trails will tend to split. For example, if you're typically auditing an EHS manager, they're going to be responsible for all of the physical stuff, physical health, physical safety, chemicals, machine guarding, fall protection, all that kind of stuff. But they'll say, okay, our human resources office takes care of all the psychosocial stuff. Hey, that's no problem. All we need to do now is follow the audit trails and go talk to HR if that's who it is. So we go talk with them. It might also be the medical clinic. For example, I've been in facilities where they run their well-being programs that cover psychosocial health and hazards, and they're run by the plant clinic or something like that. But either way, now we want to go there and find out, okay, what are the processes? What are the hazards? What are the needs and expectations? What are the controls? What are the measurements? What are the criteria and all those kind of things? So it's not a problem, but we need to follow those audit trails and then verify whether or not the processes that they have in these other departments meet the requirements in ISO 45001. OHS management system, I don't know about y'all, but I've always thought this clause is kind of useless. It basically says you've got to have a system that meets all the requirements in the standard. Okay, I won't say anything else about this. Okay, here's a recommendation. You don't have to do this. As y'all know already, the standards, including ISO 45001, are not real specific. They say the organization shall, and then it's up to the organization to decide how you do things. One of the things that I recommend, if it's possible, if it's practical, is as much as possible, consider using the same processes for promoting mental health that you use for promoting physical safety and health. For example, if you already got a good process for doing it that works with physical safety and health, most of those things are probably still going to work when we're talking about psychosocial health. You don't have to, but it might be more efficient. All right, leadership and worker participation. Again, make sure whether you're implementing or auditing that your top management understands how hazard and mental health are defined and how that's going to affect their responsibilities. They need to be aware that that's a part of the system and that they need to consider that when they're doing all those things that are listed under top management responsibilities. On the policy, make sure that the standards definition for hazards and ill health are understood and taken into account when you develop your OHS policy. Most of the time, if the policy is written generically enough, it's not going to matter. But we have to be careful. For example, if we write an OHS policy that says we commit to prevention of physical injury and physical ill health, a statement like that without any other clarification is going to scope out mental health and could probably be a finding. Roles and responsibilities, again, just confirm that everybody that has system responsibilities and authorities know that the management system addresses mental health and make them aware of all those places in the standard where we talk about hazard, risk, opportunity, incident, and so on. Also include psychosocial health. All right, a little more on this. When it comes to worker consultation and participation, remember that workers and their representatives, for example, union or whatever, they need to be trained on what their rights and responsibilities are and everything as far as their participation goes. So they need to be aware that they have the ability to influence the system with regard also to psychosocial health. They need to know that mental health is part of the system. Look at the inputs and outputs of the system. For example, does it show up in the needs and expectations? Does it show up in the process for identifying and fulfilling legal and other requirements? Is it apparent in the objectives? Is it apparent when hazards and controls are identified and determined? Okay, actions, again, just confirm that psychosocial health has been included in our planning processes, whether you're implementing. And you can see, if you just all you have to do for the most part is keep these definitions in mind, and how to do this within the system and how to audit it will become apparent. Make sure that inclusion of psychosocial health has been done when we determine and assess what our risks and opportunities are, because remember, the definitions of risks and opportunities are dependent on the definitions of hazard and ill health. And we should look at this in the documented information on risks and opportunities. So as we're looking at this, the point of all this is not to make everybody do more work. The point of it is so that we can harness the full power of our OHS management system to address psychosocial hazards. And for example, you may have seen, if you had a system running for a while, and it's the same thing with an environmental management system, you'll see your improvement curve start to flatten out in a lot of cases. And when we fully incorporate psychosocial hazards and treatment of those hazards into our system, it opens up a whole new range of new opportunities that we can exploit and make people's work life better. Okay, hazard ID. Again, now here's another place where the standard just spells it out real clearly. It requires specifically in this section to account for social factors, including workload, hours, victimization, harassment, bullying, leadership, and culture. But when you start looking at this, and especially when you start getting input from the workforce and other interested parties, you're probably going to come up with more things than just those 7 that are listed there. We also need to consider relevant incidents in the past and keep in mind that incident includes a situation that caused or could cause a psychological impact. Got to take into account everybody who could be affected, and also situations in the vicinity of the workplace. For example, when we're looking at that in terms of physical hazards, we think about our surrounding facilities. Say we're making cookies at our facility, but somebody across the street is making ammonium nitrate fertilizer. That's a threat. But now we need to also look at that with the definition of ill health and consider psychosocial hazards happening in the vicinity of the workplace. So just evaluate everything in the system with the psychosocial component in mind. Okay, here's another case study, just real quick. A couple of decades ago, I worked in a place, I was very green, had practically no experience in health and safety management. Saw an event that was not a proud moment in my life, but I was walking outside between a couple of buildings, and maybe 30 feet in front of me, these guys didn't know I was there. Walking behind them, there were a couple of guys who were abusing another guy. Very nasty racial epithets, pushing, slapping, kicking, threatening this guy with violent sexual assault and lynching. And I froze. I'd had no such experience before and just didn't know what to do. So I didn't do anything. We all went our separate ways, went on with the day. The victim didn't resist. At the time, we had no training, just an HR policy that said, don't do the following and then sign it. So there was no follow-up, no report, and no correction. So a question then is, how could we implement system processes to prevent or mitigate this situation? I put a link in here. I think you'll have a copy of this presentation, so you can go here, and it gives some guidance on harassment. But the point is here, this could have been prevented or mitigated by a formal management system that took this kind of thing into account and controlled it systematically. All right, so moving on with the requirements, when we're looking at risks and opportunities, remember what the definitions are of a risk: a combination and likelihood of occurrence of a work-related hazardous event, and the severity of injury and ill health, again, following the definition of ill health that includes psychosocial problems. An opportunity that can lead to an improvement of performance, which also includes psychosocial health. So, and on, injury and ill health, adverse effect on mental and cognitive condition of a person. So I know I'm really hammering on this, but again, if you keep the definitions in mind and then apply them throughout the standard in your implementation and your audits, you're going to come up with some good ideas of things that you can do and some audit trails that you can follow. All right, legal and other requirements. We need to remember to include those other legal and other requirements related to psychosocial hazards. For example, here's just a few of them. We got DOL, Civil Rights Act, age discrimination, ADA, if we're in another country, or remember also if you're in a state plan state, your state may have some additional regulations that fall under either your state Department of Labor or Cal OSHA or Tennessee OSHA or whatever. You might have your own requirements that come from corporate. You might have labor contracts. But again, these need to be incorporated into the management system, just like the legal and other requirements that go along with physical health and safety. Okay, planning. We're going to kind of speed up here a little bit because some of these things, I know I'm saying something that's redundant, but so some of them I'm just going to kind of hit them quick. So remember, in the planning action, include psychosocial factors, address the risks and opportunities. How are we going to address the legal and other requirements that we've added to our list now? Are there any emergencies applicable? Maybe, maybe not. Integration of actions into other processes, if any of them relate. Hierarchy of controls, which the hierarchies can maybe gets a little bit weird when we start talking about psychosocial health, but typically they're going to be administrative controls, but we might think of some other ones. It's our system, we're flexible, we can do a lot of different things with it. All right, objectives. Remember, we want to be able to support the OHS policy, which has a commitment to prevention of ill health. We've already gone over that definition. So we should be considering those things when we're planning for our objectives. And like I said before, sometimes we may have pretty much maxed out our potential for certain kinds of objectives to reduce our physical safety and health. So we can look at some other things and come up with some new objectives. The elimination of hazards and risks, keeping those definitions in mind, and continual improvement of the management system, which is aimed at continual improvement of OHS performance, which includes psychosocial health. Planning requirements are just the same. We just make sure to incorporate the definition. Same thing here. Once we've gotten, that's the end of the planning section, right? So whether we're implementing or auditing, everything else is going to follow naturally, because if we're implementing, we've already set up to incorporate all this into our planning processes. If we're in there as an internal auditor or an external auditor, all that stuff we just looked at shows us where our audit trails are going to go. Documented information, there may be some additional confidentiality requirements when we start talking about psychosocial health. So again, your HR office is going to be a good resource to help figure out how to do that. There's also some documentation that didn't used to be part of the management system, but now once you incorporate it into the management system, it may invoke your document control requirements. So make sure that those are being satisfied. All right, planning and control. Again, we've already set up for this. The output from the planning stages are going to guide the development of control process related to protecting and promoting mental health. For auditors, obviously, again, just keep following those audit trails. When you go back and you find what psychosocial hazards have been identified, you're also going to have control determinations, training types to follow up on. So just keep following those trails. Hierarchy of controls, again, probably going to be focused on administrative controls, but hey, maybe you got a couple of people that just can't get along, so you build a wall between them. I don't know. Is that a engineering control maybe? Either way, it'll give you some more things to think about. Okay, same thing. Management of change. Does the process consider the impact of change on psychosocial health? It could be a new building, it could be an expansion, it could be a big reduction. But look and see if you've got psychosocial health in there as a possible impact of changes. Procurement. Have we thought about the mental health of our suppliers and contractors and visitors and so on? Emergency prep and response, same thing. Have we figured out what psychosocial risks there might be in relation to emergency situations? For example, right now, we've got this big COVID-19 pandemic. Have we looked at what the psychosocial effects are of people who, for example, they're coming into work because they have to, or they're stuck at home, working from home? Are there any psychosocial hazards that we should consider within our system to do everything we can to keep our people healthy and safe? All right, monitoring and measurement. Now we just need to make sure that we develop criteria to go along with the psychosocial hazards, risks, and opportunities. What are the new criteria? What are we going to monitor and measure and so on? What are the activities and everything else? And are we making progress on achieving mental health related objectives? Remember, those objectives need to be measurable and all that other kind of stuff. So we've got to figure out how we're going to do it. Are our controls effective or not? Are we still seeing incidents or have they dropped off? So it's just as important to measure this as it is to measure things like our recordable incident rate. Compliance evaluation, probably to start off here, make sure that your process for evaluation of compliance with your legal and other requirements or compliance obligations, whatever you want to call them, look for consistency in the inputs and outputs, especially of context, interested party needs and expectations. Look at that, then look at your compliance obligations or your legal and other requirements list, and then look at the evaluation of compliance. All those things should be consistent. If you're looking at your evaluation of compliance and it doesn't include everything that's on your legal and other requirements list, then you've got a gap. If the legal and other requirements list didn't incorporate everything that came up in the interested parties and their needs and expectations, then you got a gap. So just look for consistency there and make sure that you've included psychosocial, legal, and other requirements into those three things, including the output documentation of your evaluation of compliance. Internal audit, same thing. Some of the things to look at is, does the internal audit determine conformance with those requirements that you got in place related to psychosocial health? Typically not. And again, it's just because that part of the organization, if the processes are there, they just haven't been incorporated into the management system. Once that's done, then we want to make sure that when we're planning the internal audit, we also include those things to find out whether that part of the system is implemented and it works. So again, it's psychosocial health included in the audit scope. Management review, same thing, going back to the leadership part. Does top management know that these things have to be included? And does the process for conducting a management review cover these things and document them as required by the standard? Improvement, again, when we're looking at improvement, just keep in mind that improvement is based on OH&S performance, which includes psychosocial health. Incident nonconformity and corrective action. Again, you don't have to use the same exact process or procedure within your system to handle incidents nonconformity and corrective action for physical health and safety and for psychosocial, but you can. If you've got a good process and procedure that works, documentation and everything, might as well use it because it's just more efficient. Different people might be involved. You might have to be more careful how you store certain records and things like that because of confidentiality. But just remember, with all this stuff, we're looking at systems, not people. Continual improvement, again, how is the system being improved to enhance OH&S performance relative to mental health? We need to look at this during the implementation and during internal and external audits. Okay, so here's an example finding, and this is going to be based on the poor leadership issue that I brought up in the first self-identified case study. So let's look at how we might write this. And if you've done much auditing, you know that a lot of issues can go under different parts of the standard. So I'll just kind of show you this one. And remember that I'm writing this in hindsight because this is something that happened years ago. I've had a lot to think about. So normally, for example, the registrars I work with, we write a three-part finding. The parts are the finding, the requirement, and the objective evidence. And based on some guidance that I got years ago from one of my fellow auditors, he suggested that the best way to write a finding is to start with the requirement. So in this case, there was a requirement within the organization to determine competence of workers that can affect its OH&S performance and ensure that workers are competent, including the ability to identify hazards on the basis of appropriate education, training, or experience. So in this case, let's say the organization had already identified, we're making some assumptions here, but the organization had already identified the fact that poor leadership is in fact an OH&S hazard from a psychological standpoint, had some training in place, the person had completed it, but for some reason it didn't work. So the finding is just basically saying that the organization didn't do this part of 7.2, not ensure that all workers are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training, or experience. The objective evidence, just pulling out a couple here. Number one was the complaints. And the second part was that there was a 14% negative response rate on coworker leadership survey on manager XXX or whoever it is. Remember, we want to focus on the system, not on the person. And it's going to be a little weird here, especially if you're coming in from the outside and you write a nonconformance like this. We may be stepping onto some touchy ground, but again, focus on the system and not the people, and make sure that if you do write a finding, that you've gone through the whole system just to try to identify which part of the system broke that let this happen. Okay, now let's look at an example corrective action. And again, this is written with the benefit of hindsight, and it's very simplified. But we went through the system, and we did identify we knew the hazard was there. We did some training, but the training didn't work. So we decided that the manager had not had the right kind of training. For example, in my case, the last time I had any real formal leadership training, it was in the military, and it was 30 years ago. And one of the things that if you've been in the military and gotten out, you may have found that your management style does not fit in a civilian work environment. So we determined that the person hasn't had the right kind of training. So for an immediate correction, the manager may counsel the supervisor, or be counseled by the supervisor, and instructed to pursue some more training focusing on leadership and people skills. In accordance with the requirements in the new standard, when we have a finding, we need to look around in our system and see, hey, is this problem occurring, or could it occur elsewhere? So we ran surveys, did some interviews, and find out, nope, it's just this one guy. Long-term corrective action, enroll the person in some servant leadership and emotional intelligence training. You got a month to complete it, and then our evaluation of effectiveness, we want to have a specific action and a date. So we're going to run another survey in 6 months. Again, these are just examples. When you start going in and doing audits or implementation, or you're the organization that's doing the corrective action, you'll see how this is supposed to be done, again, just by keeping those definitions in mind and focus on the system and not the person. Just a little bit quick about Intertech Alchemy. We do work in gap analysis, help people develop programs and continuous improvement. We do ISO 14001 or 45 internal audits, a lot of different kinds of training. We also help with compliance with OSHA and EPA and state regulations, compliance assistance, compliance evaluations, updating compliance plans, and we do a lot of training. And that's all I've got, everybody. Thank you very much for logging in. I appreciate your time. If you would like to talk or you have any questions or anything, please contact me through this email address shown on the screen. Y'all be happy and safe.
And thank you, Rick Gehrke, for that in-depth look at the mental health language of ISO 45001. That concludes this presentation.